really negative. They don't like my frown. They all try to cheer me up, but I'm down with being down, cause I'm cranky. I got my finger on the key. Yeah, I'm cranky. The oldest, wisest ape you'll ever meet.
While most Donkey Kong characters are great, you can also summarize most of them in a couple sentences. Donkey Kong is a laid-back protector.
Cool.
Funky Kong is funky.
Yo, yo, yo!
Chunky Kong is a gentle giant. Diddy Kong acts tough and cool to keep the guilt of destroying an entire civilization from destroying his spirit. But Cranky Kong, I mean, yeah, he's cranky, but there's always a lot more to him than Grandpa Simpson jokes. The elder of the Kong family has always been the most storied member of the DK crew, helped in no small part by his endless ramblings about the good old days, burning his personality into the minds of anyone who cared to read them. But there's a certain nuance to Cranky, a consistency to and development of his character that puts him past not only his simian and crocodilian contemporaries, but a significant portion of Nintendo's greater cast. Cranky takes the simple joke that his existence is based off of, plays with it for all it's worth, reflects on it, and evolves from it, ending up as one of the most entertaining, enjoyable, and rich characters in not just the Donkey Kong pantheon, but Nintendo's as a whole.
Yes! That sentence is music to my ears!
Cranky Kong is an odd character to conceptualize. Take the beloved icon of Nintendo's arcade days, the face that made them a force in video games to begin with, and then say he's a boomer who's broken down and out of touch with the kids of today.
I'll whop you, I'll squash you,
That's the tack that Rare decided to go through with. Cranky Kong, the grumpy, aged-up version of the girder-climbing, barrel-tossing primate from the arcade classic, leaving the platforming of Donkey Kong Country up to a new Donkey Kong, his grandson. Son? Temporally displaced son?
Okay.
Grandson. Okay, that's a recent enough confirmation and... Oh, who the hell are you supposed to be? Regardless of if the modern main monkey is an aged-up junior or Donkey Kong III, Cranky serves the same role, yelling about how bad the game he's in is, how pathetic his successor is, and how much better the old days were. Cranky Kong is a fourth-wall-bustin' powerhouse of a character, taking over Donkey Kong Country's game manual just to gripe about how useless all these features and characters and fancy schmancy level design philosophies are. He is a great joke, full of wit and sardonic edge that feels contemporary and smart for its backdrop of funny monkey game. It gets in the face of Nintendo's clean and authoritarian image, as was the style at the time. He's pretty hysterical, but only to a point. The joke of the tired old man complaining about what the kids call with it and based would only really land if Donkey Kong Country managed to blow the original arcade game out of the water. DKC was the first major release the Donkey Kong brand had in almost a decade. The Game Boy tile released in the same year to help support Donkey Kong Country notwithstanding. Cranky Kong represented every skeptic that DKC had to win over. Fans and even old Nintendo guard who revered the arcade game as a classic. If DKC flopped, Cranky Kong would be right. And all the self-deprecating humor in the world wouldn't save Rare from knowing that it really was better in the good old days. That they didn't make a new Donkey Kong, they made a Scrappy-Doo. But this video exists, so, that didn't happen. For all of his bluster, and though he'd never admit it, Cranky does really love Donkey Kong Country. Sure, he's glitched so that he only gives out hints on the first world and spends most of his time complaining, but he knows everything there is about the game. He didn't beat it in under an hour with only one life out of spite or anything. Donkey Kong Country did succeed. Cranky does respect and enjoy it. And he can even recognize the new Donkey Kong as a full-fledged hero who should be proud of his accomplishments.
That's very impressive, I must say.
But of course, Cranky's got an image to keep. Donkey Kong might be great, but greater than him? The original? Never. Cranky continues moving the goalpost, saying that Donkey Kong could never beat King K. Rool without his fancy graphics and the future technology that is the Super Nintendo. When DK responds, "Oh, bet?" Cranky calls K. Rool on the phone, asks him to steal the banana horde, and challenges Donkey Kong to an adventure on the less technologically advanced Game Boy, setting up Donkey Kong Land.
Let's do it again.
He even makes sure that the game ends in Big Ape City, as any real game should end in a girder-filled urban jungle, like he debuted in. And even when DK does it and meets his expectations, that doesn't mean that Diddy can waltz up and expect the same treatment.
No!
Donkey Kong Country 2 has Cranky ready to give up and surrender the banana horde to Captain K. Rool as soon as he learns that Donkey Kong has been kidnapped, not believing that wimpy little Diddy and his girlfriend could do the deed. He's even more vicious and critical of this pair than he was of Donkey and Diddy, seeing this sequel as a stupid, unnecessary cash grab of a game. How could you have a Donkey Kong game without Donkey Kong, after all?
Good question.
He even sets up an extra challenge for Diddy, just to rub it in. Cranky's video game hero coins, setting him up against real heroes of the era and showing him just how far he has to climb to even pretend to escape Donkey Kong's shadow. But Diddy, like Donkey before him, exceeds Cranky's expectations, proving himself an equal hero to Nintendo icons that Cranky can't help but revere. In spite of his constant vitriol, at the end of the game, Cranky has nothing but praise for the little monkey that could.
You played him like a Stradivarius, did he?
And that is the key to Cranky Kong's longevity: character growth. It'd be incredibly easy keeping Cranky as the same impossible-to-impress grump he started as. A fossil whose waxing poetic on the games of yesteryear would grow more and more ridiculous with each game he shouted them in. And while Cranky would still be a great novelty, that sort of one-off joke would grow really thin really quickly, turning him into the grandparent at the family dinner that you just kind of ignore spouting off the same tirades again and again.
Come on, Cranky.
Shut up.
But Cranky doesn't double down on how great his arcade classics were. He's just a bitter critic who hates change in general. DKC2 sees him lamenting the removal of Winky and Espresso, going so far as to immortalize the frog in his monkey museum, missing when games were real in Donkey Kong Country, the game that came out and he was just slamming 1 year prior. And this Killer Instinct game? Oh, that's gotta be garbage. It hasn't got Donkey Kong Sr. in it after all. But not only can you find him wanting to get a few matches in when you leave the Monkey Museum, he's actively set up shop in a Killer Instinct themed arcade by the time you reach Crazy Kremland.
Awesome.
By Donkey Kong Country 3, he's left his shack entirely, and his role as the Kong family patriarch has similarly shifted. Cranky gives no respect to Dixie, having dismissed her long ago as a would-be damsel in distress overstepping her bounds. And instead of giving his usual help, he just messes around, not even showing up in the manual, addicted to Swanky's carnival games and throwing baseballs at children when he loses.
Serves you right.
And while the respect he gives is gone, the respect he's shown similarly goes by the wayside. Wrinkly Kong complaining about her husband's time-wasting antics and negative attitude as she decides to be a real gamer and beats Mario 64. A game that, while new, she's sure that Cranky would hog if he ever actually came home. And when DKC3 is finally complete, Baron K. Rulenstein finally slain, DK and Diddy looking to Cranky to give the same respect to Dixie that he gave to them, Cranky goes,
Nope.
and Dixie decides to beat the crap out of him for it. Cranky Kong wasn't needed for the Donkey Kong Country series anymore. Dixie doesn't need his respect and approval, and he was forced to accept his place as a side character among the Donkey Kong cast. The country games had found their way out of the shadow of the Donkey Kong that came before. They could survive and even thrive without the work Cranky did in the 80s preceding them. And considering all of the insecurity and risk that came with reviving the Donkey Kong brand in such a radical way, it's cool to see the face of all the skepticism and Donkey Kong diehards totally turning around on it. Plus, Cranky cared enough to 103% complete DKC3, so he probably liked it. A little bit.
Get out of my face, Scram. Who needs you?
Future appearances would see Cranky Kong softening, bit by bit, after this incredibly humble performance. Donkey Kong 64 gives the old-timer a more actively helpful role, developing potions that teach the Kongs new moves, inventing barrels to transform their abilities, and even letting them play Jetpack on his computer to show him what real gaming looks like.
It's an oldie but a goodie, kinda like me.
Real gaming sucks. Sure, he'll still gladly insult the Kongs at every turn and insults the player directly in the manual by telling them to look up guides online and get good. But he's not just sitting back and letting his knowledge do all the talking, he's actively contributing. Donkey Kong Country Returns sees him setting up shop to make things easier on his grandson, glad to help Donkey Kong avoid death and save their home in return for a modest monetary profit. Mario plus Rabbids would introduce Rabbid Cranky, and as the Rabbids are exaggerations of the negative traits of whoever they're based off of, the crotchety old bunny is basically just a mute version of DKC1 Cranky, all ego and old man jokes with no restraint. The worst version of Cranky is just Cranky. But he's grown since that. Nothing's showing that more than how much of himself he's willing to put into a game. First bound completely to a chair, then up to a walker, restrained or walking around a single room, able to stand up under his own power and move about slowly. Okay, admittedly he goes back to the chair here, but after that... After years of complaining and hinting and decrying every single game he appears in, finally, Cranky would join in the fun as an equal member to all the other Kongs. And he hasn't become any less cranky to do it. He's still a negative old grump. But finally, Cranky is willing to embrace not being the name and draw of the Donkey Kong series that all games should hold up to his standard, but a member of the Kong family, willing to contribute and do his part in the present. And he's really fun. I mean, I like Scrooge McDuck a lot.
That's awful kind of you.
That is what I love most about Cranky Kong. He's a joke played at Nintendo's expense, the dinosaurs who own a rotting IP long past its glory days, while simultaneously being a joke on Rare, the upstart developers trying to live up to the prestige of that rotting dinosaur. He tears down both sides with equal glee, representing the potential failures of both in a self-deprecating manner, and somehow both come out the other side smiling, growing closer through the good-natured banter.
They'll fall for any joke in the book. And the joke's on them, 'cause I wrote the book.
Shigeru Miyamoto is a huge fan of this character. requesting that Retro Studios specifically keep Cranky in Donkey Kong Country Returns when they were considering what to hold on to while reviving the franchise. Donkey Kong Country grew to be a fantastic series that represented the bond between the two companies, doing more with the brand than either could have done separately. And while Nintendo and Rare have since parted ways, Cranky is still here, yelling about the days gone by, but a little wiser from the journey. More willing to help out and show new whippersnappers what Donkey Kong Country was all about. Cranky Kong is about as simple of a joke character as you can get. But behind the beard and sarcastic wit and his wife dying and burning in hell, there's something deeper. A cantankerous spirit that cannot be silenced and defines the Donkey Kong brand as a whole. And that is always worth ranting about.
Now leave me alone, I'm busy.